timeline of early NASA history. Project Mercury, August 1960, May 1963. November 21, 1960 Redstone 1 failed, crashed on launchpad and burned up all its fuel without lifting off. December 1960 Redstone 1 relaunch, success, unmanned space log. January 1961 Redstone 2 success, chimpanzee, ham, was space logged successfully, but the rocket boosters malfunctioned, sending the flight higher and further downrange than was expected. April 25, 1961 Atlas 3 failed, unmanned rocket failed to pitch and roll on ascent and had to be self-destructed 43 seconds after liftoff. May 5, 1961 Redstone 3, Freedom 7, success, Alan Shepard was lobbed to an altitude of 100 miles and landed 260 miles downrange in the ocean during his 15-minute flight, and experienced 5 minutes of weightless freefall in space. July 21, 1961 Redstone 4, Liberty Bell 7, success, Gus Grissom was space lobbed on a mission identical to Alan Shepard's space lob. Grissom's capsule accidentally opened on impact in the ocean water, and he almost drowned before the arrival of the rescue crews. September 1961 Atlas 4 success, this unmanned rocket successfully orbited the Earth 1 time. November 29, 1961 Atlas 5 success, chimpanzee, Enos, did 2 orbits around the Earth, but the mission had to be cut short before the 3rd and final orbit due to his life support systems going haywire, and so Enos was plunged into the ocean and then rescued. February 20, 1962 Atlas 6, Friendship 7, success, John Glenn successfully orbited the Earth 3 times and re-entered the atmosphere with retro rockets blasting for a few seconds longer than was planned, yet he still managed to safely plunge his capsule into the ocean landing zone all right. May 24, 1962 Atlas 7, Aurora 7, success, Scott Carpenter did 3 orbits around the Earth, all the while firing his retro rockets and trying to correct and stabilize his capsule's attitude azimuth readings, which were actually incorrect due to instrument error. He ultimately did stabilize his craft and ended up landing in the ocean with only a very critically small level of fuel left over to spare. September 1962 Atlas 8, Sigma 7, success, Wally Schirra flew a flawless 6 orbits in space and thereby cleared the way for the final Mercury mission to take place. May 15, 1963 Atlas 9, Faith 7, success, Gordon Cooper flew his craft 22 orbits around the Earth over a 34-hour period of time. During orbit number 4 he tossed a 6-inch diameter flashing frisbee out of his capsule to test his distance range of visibility. His flight went flawless until orbit number 19, when his 0.05 G gravity sensor alarm signal started flashing, and ground control decided that doing a manual re-entry was the best solution. After orbit 21, Gordon ended up making a safe re-entry and landed in the Pacific Ocean. Project Gemini, April 1964, November 1966, April 8, 1964 Titan 1 success, unmanned flight of a Titan Type 2 rocket for testing the rocket control system and the launch trajectory of the booster. January 1965 Titan 2 success, an unmanned space lob that tested the propulsion and guidance systems of the Titan rocket and the capsule re-entry heat shield. March 23, 1965 Titan 3, Molly Brown, success, Gus Grissom and John Young went up for 3 orbits around Earth. June 3, 1965 Titan 4 success, 4-day-long mission. Jim McDivitt unsuccessfully attempted to redock with the launch booster after it separated from his ship, but demonstrated some other orbital maneuvers quite well though. Ed White performed the first NASA EVA spacewalk. August 21, 1965 Titan 5 success, Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad went into Earth orbit for a total of 8 days, during which they tested the rendezvous radar system, demonstrated orbital maneuvers, and did 17 space experiments. October 25, 1965 Titan 6 scrubbed was planned to dock with a modified Agena rocket, but was scrubbed after the Agena rocket messed up and plunged into the Atlantic Ocean. Was replanned for later docking with Gemini 7. December 4th, 1965 December 15th, 1965 Gemini 7 success Frank Borman and James Lovell orbited the Earth for 14 days. On day 11, they were joined by the Gemini 6 craft, where Shara and Stafford made first successful space rendezvous in NASA history. March 16, 1966 Gemini 8 success Dave Scott and Neil Armstrong successfully docked with a modified Agena rocket, but made a mistake in undocking after the ship started spinning, which only caused their ship to spin even more rapidly. A valuable physics lesson about treating docked spaceships as one single ship was thereby learned. June 3, 1966 Gemini 9A and Agena success Stafford and Cernan went up and tested out 3 maneuvers regarding how to successfully rendezvous with an Agena rocket while in orbit. An uneventful EVA was performed to get the shroud off the Agena and make docking possible, but had to be aborted when Cernan couldn't see anything through his overfogged helmet. July-November 1966 Gemini 10 Gemini 11 Gemini 12 successes in Gemini 10, 11, and 12 astronauts Mike Collins, Dick Gordon, and Buzz Aldrin each performed EVA spacewalks and successfully tested out their pressurized gas thruster packs. In Gemini 10 and 11 there were new records being set for docking and height achievements. And in Gemini 12 the tether design for spacewalking was much improved due to a scary incident that occurred with the tether on the Gemini 11 spacewalk. Project Apollo, January 1967, December 1972. January 27, 1967 Apollo 1 failed. This mission tragically ended killing Gus Grissom, Roger Chaffee, and Ed White when the command service module caught fire while still on the launch pad due to an enriched oxygen environment. Apollo 2 and 3, AS-201 and AS-202 success 2 unmanned Saturn IB rockets were tested prior to Apollo 4. November 9, 1967 Apollo 4 success and unmanned Saturn V was space-lobbed to test out the heat shields on the Command Service Module CSM at re-entry. January 22, 1968 Apollo 5 success. This was an unmanned mission used to test the lunar module landing and takeoff capabilities on Earth. Apollo 6 scrubbed. This mission was scrubbed as the fuel lines in the upper stages of the unmanned Saturn V rocket were damaged due to severe pogo oscillations upon takeoff. The rocket didn't achieve translunar orbital velocities as planned but rather went into a highly elliptical 100x200 mi parking orbit and then went to 12,000-mile apogee to make atmospheric re-entry at about Mach 30 at about 10 hours after launch. Much engineering data was learned about the Saturn V rockets from the violent shakedown that occurred at launch, and the design was improved upon for future missions. October 11, 1968 Apollo 7 success Don Isley, Wally Schirra, and Walt Cunningham went 11 days into Earth orbit all while performing many important space tests and performing various orbital rocket maneuvering procedures. December 21, 1968 Apollo 8 success Frank Borman, James Lovell Jr., and William Anders did a 7-day mission where they orbited the Moon 10 times, took many pictures of the back and the front side of the Moon for possible landing zones on future missions. They tested out landmark tracking procedures and demonstrated that it's possible to compute relative position coordinates for future lunar missions. March 3, 1969 Apollo 9 success Rusty Schweickart, Dave Scott, and Jim McDivitt spent the first 4 days docked in Earth orbit. Jim and Rusty in the lunar module undocked from Dave in the command module and tested some rendezvous and redocking maneuvers that were to be used in the upcoming lunar landing missions. The lunar module proved to be remarkably easy to stabilize in zero-G conditions. May 18, 1969 Apollo 10, the dress rehearsal success Thomas Stafford, John Young, Eugene Cernan slungshot around Earth and then to the Moon by way of translunar orbit. Upon lunar orbit injection, Stafford and Cernan undocked from the command module and descended to within 8 miles of the lunar surface in the lunar module where they performed 6 hours of tests with the communications, navigations, and landing radar equipment and then reascended back to the command module and redocked with John Young. On days 3-6, they orbited the moon 31 times, taking many photos and took many lunar gravitational measurements. They left lunar orbit on day 6 and re-entered and safely splashed down into the ocean on day 8. July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 CM Columbia LM Eagle success. Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin slung-shot around the Earth in 1.5 orbits and then flew on a 4-day translunar orbit to the moon, where they injected into lunar orbit. From there, Neil and Buzz undocked from the command module and landed the Eagle in the Sea of Tranquility with only 40 seconds of fuel left over. They camped out on the moon doing all kinds of scientific seismographic and soil composition experiments and retrieving various kinds of lunar rocks, and also planted the American flag and an Apollo 11 plaque on the moon too. Then they blasted off from the moon, redocked with the command module, and left lunar orbit to splash down 4 days later just outside of Hawaii. November 14, 1969, Apollo 12 CM Yankee Clipper LM Interpret success. Alan Bean, Richard Gordon, and Charles Conrad ran the same type of mission as Apollo 11. Then Charles, Pete Conrad, and Alan Bean landed the lunar module on Oceanus Procellarum crater. They performed scientific experiments to determine the lunar magnetic field vectors, solar wind measurements, soil composition samples, seismographic readings, and more. They left the moon on day 6 and splashed down on the ocean day 10. April 11, 1970, Apollo 13 CM success. LM scrub James Lovell, John Swigert Jr., and Fred Hayes had to perform an emergency return to Earth after their mission was aborted due to an oxygen tank explosion, and a fatal buildup of CO2 in the craft resulted. They did a lunar flyby to slingshot back to Earth and safely splashed down in the ocean. January 31, 1971, Apollo 14 CM Kitty Hawk LM Antares success. Alan Shepard, Edgar Mitchell, and Stuart Russo went on a third 10-day lunar mission. Alan Shepard and Edgar Mitchell camped in the lunar module for 33.5 hours and EVA on the lunar surface for 9.5 hours of that time. On their EVA, extravehicular activity, Alan and Edgar pulled a two-wheeled wagon around with them so they could take their measurement instruments with them and collect rocks in it. There were plenty more scientific tests performed on this mission as well. July 26, 1971, Apollo 15 CM Endeavour LM Falcon success. Dave Scott, James Irwin, and Alfred Worden went to the moon. Alfred Worden in the CM Endeavour and Dave and James were in the LM Falcon at the Hadley-Rayleigh Pennines lunar region. They spent twice as much time in Apollo 15, 67 hours on the lunar surface, than was spent on Apollo 14, and because they had a lunar Jeeper rover with them, they were able to travel as much as 10x further around on the lunar surface as well. They also launched a satellite around the moon on this mission as well. April 16, 1972, Apollo 16 CM Casper LM Orion success. Charles Duke, John Young, and Thomas Mattingly went on this 11-day mission. Charles and John landed the LM Orion at Descartes crater. They stayed there for a period of 71 hours, and traversed up to 27 kilometers on the lunar surface in their lunar Jeeper, taking samples and performing experiments as well. In this mission they deployed another lunar satellite from the command module, Casper, which further measured the moon's gravitational field distribution, the lunar magnetosphere, and electron densities. In this mission they measured meteorite distributions and tested electrical field effects on bacteria, spores, and seeds too. December 7, 1972, Apollo 17 CM America LM Challenger success. Eugene Cernan, geologist Harrison Schmitt, and Ronald Evans embarked on a final Apollo mission that lasted 12 days. On this mission, Gene and Schmitt spent 72 hours on the lunar surface in the Torres-Latro Valley area doing all types of experiments and geological surveying, and roving around for long distances in the lunar Jeeper before leaving the moon one final time during the Apollo